Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Oh, stressful
Well,
Sundays.
that was a bit hairy.
Stressful Sundays. But we're here, we're back. The technology has been fixed. And we have a show.
Well, that remains to be seen. Yes, we are here. Thank you very much for wrestling with the technology, Simon. Unfortunately, Ben Swann couldn't make it tonight. He's not feeling very well. But Simon was still glad to fight his way through the technical demons. We had different technical demons tonight that aren't related to me dusting the mixer. So a slightly different show, but a rerun of the one that we had to abort the week before last because basically tech was against us. So welcome back, Simon.
Good evening, gentlemen, and how are you?
I've got a little bit less hair now, but I'm fine. There's so much hair in the first place. Yeah. So doing well, thank you. So with Ben not being able to make it and it being unfortunately we weren't able to round up another Conservative who wasn't available, but we do have one on hand.
Here's one we prepared earlier.
So we're going to slightly break the fourth wall. Sounding all artsy now. We're going to break the fourth wall and put Ian on the other side of the metaphorical interview desk. I say metaphorical because we're all not in the same place. So if you were on the other side of the desk I'm talking about, you'd be in my ensuite, which you probably wouldn't want to be. So in that respect, that'll be an interesting angle because obviously Simon being the leader of the Portsmouth Conservatives on the Portsmouth City Council, and Ian being a member of the Conservative Party in Portsmouth, so he has an angle and a view.
I have a view on most things, Simon.
Really, you're normally so shy and retiring. It's so hard to get your opinion out of you normally.
Yeah, but this evening, maybe you'll have to be nice to me this evening. Now I'm a guest, right? I'm going to sit in the guest chair and enjoy it.
Well, just as long as you don't want any biscuits or tea, because that's not happening either. Simon's not getting any after wrestling with all that tech. Then you'll have to bloody get your own. Okay, so we shall we make a start then?
Let's do it.
Let's go for this. Okay, so question one, it's inevitable, isn't it? I guess. So did you see Boris's exit as inevitable, or was it unfair that his cabinet turned on him? I'll go to Simon first.
I think we were getting to that point where there was a degree of inevitability behind it because there was a lot of noise and distraction around Boris with Partygate and a variety of other things. It just kept dripping out there. But I think he was becoming a distraction to the policies, to be quite honest. The strength at which the cabinet sort of turned on him was somewhat surprising, I have to say. But I think we were moving in that general direction with regards to Boris and his time in number 10.
Okay, so on the cards, but it developed pretty quickly from something that seemed quite inevitable, I guess. Then.
I think these things generally do start to happen quite quickly. All of a sudden it sort of happened within 24, 48 hours, if that. I think. That sort of didn't surprise me. Once one goes, it's like dominoes, really. Everybody looking to turn on him and queue up, shall we say. But I think there was a degree of frustration. We certainly saw it on the doorstep in the May elections, with people fed up with the antics surrounding Boris. And it sort of got in the way of our local messages, which we thought were very strong ones.
Indeed. Ian, what was your view?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think with Boris's exit, it's the conversations that you didn't get to hear about as much as the ones that you did. Firstly, during that whole process, I was always slightly quizzical as to who was the person who had the drawer full of Partygate information that they drip fed into the media, probably from just after Christmas, and it was months of a little bit of information. There was an element of, respond to that, a little bit more information. Yeah, what he said last time, add some more details. So I think there was a whole, there was definitely something going on that was keeping Boris kind of front and center in terms of, it not being a great look in terms of optics. And I think, Boris has been the great survivor in terms of, whatever had happened in the past. And when the house finally came down, as Simon said, it came down very quickly. But I think that that was, the famous political drama House of Cards. I think couldn't have summed it up any better. Once it goes, it goes. And I think there was very much an inevitability about it. Once things started to go. So I know that many still feel that Boris was owed a great deal of loyalty, but I think, that final straw when he sent, senior ministers out to brief to say, no, I knew nothing. And then 2 days later had to say, oh, apart from the briefing that I had privately. I think at that point it was inevitable that he had to go.
There was a lot of Duke of York briefing, wasn't there? You ride your troops up to the top of the hill to say one thing, and then you ride them back down again the next day to basically wind back what you've told them to go and say honestly to the media. So that happened again. So does that mean we've seen the last of him, do you think, or does that mean that he'll be back?
It depends what you mean by he'll be back. I don't think we've seen the last of Boris, to be quite honest. Boris is Boris, as they say. I mean, whatever you might think, he is a very charismatic personality. I mean, I always go back to the London Olympics with him on a zip wire where he was waving the Union Jacks. I mean, you could have put any other politician in that particular scenario, and I don't think any of them would have come out of it as well as Boris did. He does have a likability about him in that respect, and I don't think we've seen the last of him. Whether he would come back as Prime Minister or leader of the Conservative Party probably remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think I'm more sceptical. I think Boris will never go away. Boris, as Simon said, he's very charismatic, and if an old Etonian who quotes classics and Latin could get the red wall to turn blue, then and win the London mayoral election, which you kind of look at it and you think, well, when you look at London MPs, it's he does have a knack of winning, and even people refer back to some of his his early issues around journalism and being sacked, and he always comes back in one form or another. So I'm not certain he'd come back as Prime Minister again. I think I'm not even sure that he'd want to, but I don't expect him to go quietly into the good night.
No.
Okay. So obviously the ensuing leadership election. So when it got down to 5 from I forget how many there were at the start. But actually, when it got down to the 5, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss were 4th and 5th choices with the members, not so with the parliamentary party. Is this a sign that the election process for Conservative leader isn't fit for purpose, and what might you change if not?
I think it dragged on much too long. If I'm honest, it seemed to go on for an absolute eternity. I would have liked to have seen more of the candidates put before the party to make that decision. I think it came across to me very much that there was an element of how can I put it, to probably inappropriate to say smoke-filled corridors in this day and age where we can't smoke in corridors anymore. But it struck me that there was an element of Rishi shifting votes in the parliamentary party over to Liz because he probably felt his chances were better against Liz than they were probably against Penny Mordaunt. I would have liked to have seen a choice of 3 or maybe 4 candidates go forward to the membership. But having said that, then you end up with potentially the elected member not having a full mandate when it comes to the party leadership. It's a difficult one, really, but certainly the process for me was much too long and drawn out, I think.
It did seem to go on. It was a bit like one of those endless series on Netflix where you think, look, the writers have obviously, given up any clue as to what actually is meant to be happening next, and it's just going on and on. Ian, as a local member that cast a vote in, this was your first opportunity to vote in a leadership election.
Yeah, it was. I joined the party after Boris had been elected, but I have looked back over the previous leadership elections, and I'll be honest, the process for me isn't fit for purpose. We had the situation where it came down to I was going to say Brian May then, but that wouldn't be right at all. That would be the guitarist from Queen. But Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom withdrew, so it was a coronation, not a vote. And interesting, I was reflecting on it this week. I think Michael Gove came third in that vote, and I think he would have beaten Theresa May in a vote with the members. If I look at Boris, it was Boris or Jeremy Hunt, and again, the whole mantra of get Brexit done, Jeremy, a very sort of strong Europhile, not really much of a choice. And I think in this case, I've been very clear that I would have cast my vote for when we got down to the final 5. I would have preferred any of the other 3 over the 2 that we got on the ballot paper. So I was very troubled by the process, and initially a part of my voting intention was shaped by the fact that I felt the parliamentary party was trying to engineer the situation where it was a case of, well, you've got to vote for Rishi because we've put it's Rishi or the weakest candidate of the 5, and there's a bullishness and an awkwardness in me that says, well, if you try and manipulate me in that way, I simply won't do what you're trying to get me to do. So no, I'm very unhappy with the process. I think it would have been, in this day and age, it wouldn't be difficult at all to put 4 or 5 candidates on there. And I think if you work within a single transferable vote, where effectively you rank your 5 in preference order, then I think that kind of nullifies the risk of somebody not having a full mandate as candidates are eliminated.
I see. So you end up with, at least, even if it wasn't the majority's first preference, you end up with a winning candidate that at least had some support from the party. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's simple. You start with all 5 It's almost a little bit what the parliamentary party does, but you do it, rather you doing it in rounds, you do it in a oneer. You start with the 5. When the 5th place candidate is eliminated, you look at the second choices for all of those candidates' votes, you transfer them to whoever, and effectively you keep going through that process until there's a clear winner. So yeah, I think there are better ways that would actually ensure that the membership gets the style of Conservative leader that they genuinely want.
It's an interesting thought. I know that other parties use the SDV system to elect their leaders, so they don't do them in rounds. They go straight to membership. I know that's what the Lib Dems do. But obviously with the last few leadership elections they've had, they haven't exactly been quite the breadth of field that you had in the Conservative leadership election. So it's not really, doesn't really kind of come to play when there are only 2 choices. There's no point really listing them in order of preference. But
Yeah, I think the other danger is that you get into the danger that the Labour Party did a few years ago, which is that the parliamentary party was saddled with a leader that they simply didn't feel they could work with, and that disconnect between the desire of the membership and the desire of the parliamentary party, there was a gaping chasm there. I don't think within the Conservative Party we've got potentially that issue. Welcome your thoughts, Simon, but I think there is a risk to that approach.
Your thoughts on that, Simon? Is there the Labour Party quite clearly demonstrated that in the Corbyn years, the difference between the parliamentary party and the membership, and to a degree, that's been evident in, for example, how the UK party, the Green Party, dealt with issues like standing aside for candidates, to support candidates that were in favour, for example, of a second referendum, standing aside candidates that to help that situation. You know, for example, in Portsmouth, I know that there was a difference between what the National Party said and what the local supporters did, rather than put their support behind the National Party's quote unquote approved measure of support, which would have been the Lib Dem candidate. They went and voted probably for Stephen Morgan, for the Labour candidate, who had the greater chance of winning. So, do you think there's an evidence of a disconnect between the parliamentary party and the membership, Simon?
To a point, I think there probably is, and you could probably level the same argument at any parliamentary party of whatever political colour. There is a bit of a disconnect between what happens in Westminster and what actually happens out in the country, because certainly when the two candidates that seemed to be coming through pretty popular with the rank and file members that I spoke to were Penny, but then again there's an element of Portsmouth bias in there, I would imagine. But the other candidate that seemed to come through very well was Kemi Badenoch. She sort of was the candidate that nobody really knew, but when it actually came down to it, a lot of people were quite engaged with what she actually had to say. We ended up with two candidates who I think were probably instrumental in getting rid of Boris, and it was almost a case of more of the same. Probably what depressed me a little bit about the leadership election is the fact that they weren't really talking to the Conservative Party membership. It was more a case they were trying to bite lumps out of each other and play higher and higher, which didn't really play well to me as a party voter, and having a particular role in that. But certainly Penny and Kemi were very popular amongst the rank and file members, and it would have been good to have seen one or both of those in that particular field that the membership could have had it voted on, and we might have a completely different scenario in number 10 on that basis.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing of the path not travelled, isn't it? And where it's
it is.
An interesting comment just to chuck in there. So Owen in the comments has said that he's a red, not a blue in politics and in football, but would like to take the opportunity to tell Simon that what a wonderful teacher his mother was to him as a child. So there we go.
Thank you very much, Owen. Owen's probably showing his age because my mum will be 88 next month, and she's probably been retired now for well over 20 years.
Right. Okay. Well, we certainly left a mark on Owen then, in all the nicest, in the nicest ways. And Phil also joins in as another party, paid up party member. Perhaps we should have left it to the parliamentary party. Have read several articles since Boris left to mention other MPs knew exactly what he was like. Unlike perhaps I voted for him and have lived to regret it. Thankfully, I can't say the same for Liz, as I voted for Rishi. However, the candidate I wanted was Penny, sensible, service background, and trustworthy. So yeah, I think that's another good view from the local membership there from Phil. So thank you, Phil and Owen, both for your contributions. So let's have a look at our next question then. So Liz won 57% of the vote of the Conservative members, and has chosen mostly supporters for her cabinet positions. Do you think she's got a strong enough mandate to unite the party? Because that seems to be what's needed.
I think she did, until we had the top rate of tax being removed, which I don't think played out particularly well. With regards to putting her supporters in the cabinet, well, I think that's what most leaders actually do. And you could go back to, I mean, I appreciate they were in opposition, but certainly with Jeremy Corbyn getting elected, one of his first roles was to put John McDonnell in as his chancellor, who has the same sort of political thinking and is one of Jeremy's biggest supporters. So I think they will always do that. I think that's so that they're all on the same page and working as a team, and I would have expected that to have actually happened. But uniting the party, well, I think that's always going to be a challenge for any leader of any political party. There are going to be factions within political parties that have slightly differing views, and any leader is going to face that challenge internally. I don't think the political party or the Conservatives in this particular instance are unique in that.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, my view was I journeyed in hope, I think, would be where I got to. So from a personal perspective, I looked at the two candidates and wasn't wildly keen on either. So the first time, probably ever possibly, I went and decided to have a listen to Liz firsthand down at a meeting that Penny hosted down in Southsea, and I recognise that in certain aspects, Liz was playing to the crowd. It was a Conservative Party event, so you are probably going to be pointing a little further right than centre. But ultimately, with the things that she spoke of and the policies that she articulated, I felt I was able to go from being well, I'm going to vote for Liz because you can't make me vote for Rishi, to somebody that made an active choice as somebody who I felt could draw the party together, particularly, if she was going to bring people like Penny into a top table, to really kind of almost create a cabinet of talent rather than necessarily the people who have been most loyal. I absolutely acknowledge what Simon says. At the end of the day, politics is a dirty game, and you're not going to invite someone to sit at your top table if they're sat there putting a keen edge on their backstabbing knife. But I felt strongly that she did have a mandate to bring the party together and to create, a very different vision and a different tone to the previous administration. I'll be honest that I felt very quickly within 2 weeks, what I had hoped for had started to be either badly eroded, dented, or I was concerned with the some of the directions that she was taking.
Okay, so does that mean that the uniting the party is a harder thing now?
I think so, because I think the Conservative Party is a broad church. I know, online it's very easy to, and regularly we are tarred with an enormously wide brush, but there are different viewpoints. The axis of authoritarian versus libertarian is very writ large amongst party members. So I think it's never the easiest job, but I think one of the things the party's been very good at is, it is when we get something that we can work with, uniting behind a leader and pushing forward, I think is something that historically we've been pretty good at, provided it's something that we individually you feel you can put your name to.
Okay, so speaking of the you said that you went to the speech in Southsea. So no more handouts was one of the key messages in Liz Truss's election campaign. In light of the energy interventions and tax cuts in the mini fiscal event, what would you say to a fiscal conservative who supported her? How are you? Because you're quite clearly
Me?
Oh
yeah.
as a fiscal conservative. So how does that land with you?
That's a horrible question. I don't know who wrote that, but
You did.
yeah, I know. I'm now going to have to deal with it. So it's nowhere near as good a question as it was when I wrote it. But no, as a fiscal conservative, I'm pretty angry, if I'm honest, because I think there is an element of, for me, with some of the interventions, that they're, it's about populism. It's not about doing the right thing and what needs to be done. And actually, I think it is. I think it is a futile exercise. Again, and I've had discussions in the past about the amount of financial and fiscal intervention there was during the pandemic, and many people have said, well, if we didn't, you had to do and you had to spend and maybe that's true and maybe it's not. But ultimately, I think there is an element of what that's demonstrated, and was demonstrated even more by the energy tariff, and it's not a cap, but the intervention was that it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the public, at the electorate, it isn't going to, there's an element of, people will say, well, I don't agree with that, but I'll take that off you anyway, and there is no credit to be gained from it. So for me, this approach to, if there's enough noise in the press, we'll just throw 60, 90 billion, however much at it, I think is a really poor way to govern. And for me, it is not the, it's not the responsible fiscal conservative position that is where I'm at. But yeah, I've got fairly strong views on that. I'll throw it over to Simon now, who perhaps
Yeah,
is a kinder
yeah,
and nicer individual than me.
I really wish you would come off the fence on that one, Ian.
Yeah.
So Simon, is someone that has to get elected at some point. What do you have to say on that?
I've got another 3.5 years before I have to worry about
You're
that
all right.
one. So hopefully will have improved by then. I think when you're looking at the role of government, when you're looking at extenuating circumstances, and I think we've had a bit of a perfect storm, what with the pandemic, and then subsequently the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian state. Both of those are creating a scenario which are pushing up energy prices and creating what people are calling the cost of living crisis. I'm a fiscal conservative in so much I believe in lower taxation, but it's, to a certain degree, it's got to be when the timing is right to actually do it. And I think with the 45-degree tax, that probably isn't the right time to do it, because I think it sends out the wrong particular message. But certainly with the energy price cap, if that's what we want to call it, I don't think that's going to win the Conservatives any favours in the long term, in any shape or form. Because, as Ian said, I'll quite happily take your money, but I don't actually agree with it. And I think to a certain degree, we need to look at seeing what sort of taxes we could actually reduce. And it would be nice to have seen something more about the lower end. I mean, I know we're reversing the national insurance hike, which is probably a good move in that respect. But certainly, with regards to the energy price cap, it was probably the right decision at this moment in time, I think. But in the longer term, we need to get stability into the financial markets and start bringing the inflation rate down at the same time.
It's an interesting, because someone that styles themselves as a disruptor at a time when what the markets and indeed the public are looking for is perhaps stability, is that, look, it's going to be okay, is an interesting strategy. And is that maybe what the kind of reaction was about? Is the disruption at a point where people are uncertain? Is that perhaps what's kind of driven the response, do you think?
I think there's a degree of uncertainty, but I think removing the 45p tax was probably the wrong thing to do at this moment in time. I mean, the amount of the cost of actually doing that was pretty minimal when you consider the rest of the packages, but the media focused in on that particular one. The opposition parties seized on it with their sort of like tax breaks for the rich, but everybody else is still in the same boat they always were. And I think that sent out the wrong messages. There was a good package of measures there in other areas, but it became the single distractor all the way through. And then we ended up with a reversal of that particular decision. And we also ended up, unfortunately, in a situation where it was all of a sudden it was the Chancellor's decision and the Prime Minister wasn't aware of it. And I don't think that played out particularly well. You know, been there for a month and already thrown your Chancellor under the bus. Not a great start.
Yeah, it was an interesting way to start conference for Liz Truss. I do still
Pretty.
I do still wonder that, considering that the Lib Dems cancelled their conference because of it clashed with the mourning period for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. That actually, despite them cancelling their conference, the best thing that could possibly happen to them was the Conservative conference. I'm not sure that anything that would have happened at the Lib Dem conference would have done as much for Lib Dem votes as what happened at the Conservative conference. Is that, or am I just being cheeky?
I think pre-conference you've probably got a case. I think there's an element of and you know, to that 45 the cut in the 45p tax rate for me was just I just sat there flabbergasted, because you know it wasn't just an own goal. You know, it was a hat trick of own goals in one policy. You know, anybody who's earning more than £150,000, you know, an extra 400, 500, 600 to, you know, multiple thousands per month in their take-home pay isn't going to make a material difference to them. So, you know, I absolutely, and as Simon hinted there, you know, if you've got 2 billion to chuck around, raise the personal tax threshold, because then anybody who earns less than 100k is going to benefit from that. And you know, those that earn more than 100k pay their personal tax threshold back when they hit 100k. So you know, the optics of you know the 45p tax rate was just farcical. And again, this is where for me it's the head in the hands moment, where you know, oh, when the Chancellor stood up, I didn't know he was going to cut the 45p rate. And it does worry me in terms of I haven't found anybody of any political persuasion who's been able to even give me the, yes, but it was a good idea to cut that because. But it's not even a plausible answer. I haven't heard anybody try and justify it. And as Simon rightly points out, you know, there were some really big positive growth messages in there, but it was always going to get drowned out by the worst tax breaks for the rich, and it's looking after their mates, and it's what they're all at. And I just sat there, I wanted to weep.
So to save you from your tears, then let's try to take a more positive angle then on the fiscal event. So what parts of the fiscal statement were good for Portsmouth? And is there any that you'd have changed, other than the ones that we've discussed? Obviously, to thinking specifically of Portsmouth.
I don't think I would necessarily changed any, but certainly around the messages around growth were very positive. Portsmouth is looking at a free port, and now we're doing it looking at it from an investment zone point of view, which some are describing as a free port on steroids. So that sort of investment coming into the city is going to be a positive thing, and that's certainly something that we're looking to build on. I mean, we've also got things like the delivery of major infrastructure projects. Obviously, we're going through the local plan, and I use the two words Tipner West for Tuesday, which is going to be an interesting debate. But certainly, Portsmouth is on the up in a lot of respects. There's a lot of exciting things actually happening with major developments in the city. and certainly the introduction of things like the investment zones, which we're well on the way to actually being involved in, are just going to benefit Portsmouth significantly going forward. So certainly the messages around growth are there for us to actually capitalise on it. And really, so I appreciate we have a Liberal Democrat administration there, but I think when it comes to growth and benefiting the city, I think that all the political parties are probably on very similar wavelengths.
Okay. Ian, was there anything that you would have?
I kind of echo that, which is that, you know, ultimately you can't tax your way to prosperity. You know, we're in a situation where, you know, if we look at the whole equation, if we can, you know, if the policies, and they are brave, if they can get that economic stimulus in Portsmouth, for me, the more good jobs we have in Portsmouth, you know, even to the point of view of you've only got to stand by the M275 or London Road and just see how many people are driving out of Portsmouth every morning to go and work somewhere else. So for me, any investment we can bring to the city, which, you know, it brings a green dividend if people can you know, work closer to where they live, you know, decent pay, people spend it close to where they live. You know, it is that stimulating growth in the economy, particularly within a city like Portsmouth, it's such, you know, it's such a positive move, and it will just, you know, it's the stimulus that we need. You can't improve things just by keep cutting costs and increasing taxes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, so thinking of kind of polling responses, the political poll of polls, Politico poll of polls. Try saying that when you're drunk. Puts Labour 23 points ahead of Conservatives. There were obviously that's an average of the poll of all of the other polls that have been out. Others have said a much starker distance, or much starmer distance between them, they might say. Is there still time to turn it around before the next GE, as long as someone doesn't have the crazy idea of going for an early general election, Simon?
I don't think anybody's going to go for an early general election, if I'm honest. Liz Truss is going to want to shape things in her image going forward. She has actually impressed me over the years. I mean, I've seen her giving speeches in the past. There's one of them that regularly pops up on "Have I Got News for You?" about opening up new pork markets, which keeps getting recycled. But actually, she has developed into a pretty decent orator when it comes to it. So I think she's got to be given that little bit of time. So I don't think we're going to have an early general election. With regards to closing the gap, absolutely. I think it's all to play for there. I mean, Keir Starmer hasn't impressed me, and I think he's getting dissent from within his own party. We're beginning to see more noise around the momentum wing of the Labour Party. So I think we're in for 18 months potentially of Keir Starmer actually having to step up and deliver something, because certainly I've not seen anything from him to suggest that he is a credible alternative at this precise moment in time. So I think we can overturn that 23% deficit. Would we have the same sort of majority in a general election in a couple of years' time? I suspect that, having been in power for 12 years, 14 years now, that we might see a reduced majority, but I'm fully expecting to see another Conservative majority next time.
Yeah, my thoughts are God bless Angela Rayner.
She does help too.
Because, you know, Keir, if you just listen to what he says, you know, for me, sometimes he sounds more and more credible without actually putting forward too many policies or any real substance. But, you know, the guy is a QC. He speaks eloquently, and he, you know, he presents a centre left option. The interesting thing is that quite a sizable chunk of his party considers adopting a centre-left set of policies to be a betrayal of socialist purity, and are ready to throw him under the bus at the first opportunity. And I think often when Angela Rayner speaks, you hear you see the wolf in the sheep's clothing. And I think at that point it does gladden me to think that there is 18 months to turn this around. I think it is going to be a significant turnaround, but I also look at it and the boot's on the other foot at the moment. When Boris got the 80-seat majority, the pundits and the political commentators were very clear that Labour will not reverse an 80-seat majority inside one term of Parliament. They were adamant at the time, and if there was a general election tomorrow, they would have turned it round in 60% of a Parliament, because they would win a sizable election. But I think as we get closer to the election proper, I think that people will start to consider, we'll have to consider very carefully, is the Labour Party a credible alternative? And, once they're, if they were fortunate enough to win the keys to number 10, would you get a centre-left Labour Party, or at that point would all of the momentumites swarm from the dark corners, and we would have the socialist financial massacre that anybody who's old enough to remember the late 70s, it feels like it'd be a rerun of that. So it's an element of, I think we've got a hell of a job, and I think there's a lot of work to be done to rebuild some of the trust that we've lost over the last couple of years. But I don't think we're dead yet.
Okay, well, we shall see, obviously, over the next couple of years. Okay, so regardless of what happens with the next general election, that's a couple of years away, and unless someone does something really crazy, like but as Simon said, that's exceedingly unlikely. So we know that we've still got local elections coming along in May. So what's the key messaging? What should the key messaging be locally to persuade voters to stick with or to give their support to the Conservatives? Simon?
Well, we've got a very strong team at council level, an awful lot of talent in our particular group. We're going to continue to hold the Liberal Democrat administration to account. I think we will do what we will normally do, and that is concentrate on local issues for local people. It's always been a strong message, certainly when it comes down to the council elections. People aren't thinking about necessarily what's happening in Westminster, although having said that, they did last time because of Partygate. But generally, people are interested in the services that they engage with from the city council, the bins being collected, the street lights working, and those sorts of issues. It's going to be those sorts of issues that we're chiming into. We're already out and about across a lot of the wards in the city, putting our message across. But I think one of the key issues is going to be the budget next May. For next May, the budget in February, because certainly the messages that we are getting from officers is that we are going to have a financial black hole that is being created. Certainly some of the spending ideas that the Liberal Democrats have gone down the line with. And I think that's actually going to chime going forward, because I think we're facing some cuts in various areas to pay for some of their vanity projects. I think that's going to be the interesting thing. But we also have essentially a three-party system, even a four-party system now, with the Portsmouth Independent Party going forward into the local election. So I think it's going to be very hard fought. And it's those messages that can actually chime with your immediate neighbours that are actually going to get people across the line, I think. But we will be looking at it from, as we always do, the local messages affecting local people.
Okay, thanks. Ian, what would you like to see as the message for May?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge. Last May was very clearly, there were a number of votes cast which were clearly none of the above. There was a very strong protest vote. I think there is an element of, in terms of holding the administration to account, that there is an element of, ultimately, if you vote yellow, red, or purple, you're not going to hold the administration to account, because that the whatever, however you choose to describe the arrangement that exists between the Lib Dems and Portsmouth Labour. Portsmouth Labour spends a lot of its year attacking the administration, berates the Lib Dems, and then when all the votes are cast, the next day says, "You fancy a leg up back into running the city?" To which the Lib Dems nod and say, "Yes, please," and round we go again. So, I think the local Conservative team have got to focus very strongly on that local message and about providing real kind of opposition. I think it will be a challenge, because I think for those that are perhaps more politically disengaged, they will look at the national issues. But they say a week's a long time in politics. We've got 7 months till those local elections, and plenty of time to get a message out. But I think it is, the focus has really got to be on the fact that at that local level, it's what are you voting for, in terms of making sure that there is scrutiny of the administration, and particularly if, as Simon has outlined, if there are going to be tough decisions to be made, you want to make sure your voice is represented.
Okay, so this should hopefully be quite an easy one. So, should the government be spending £15 million telling people how to use less electricity and gas? Considering that's something that Ofgem and the energy regulator and energy suppliers indeed already spend money telling people how to use less. Is that something that the government should get involved in, Simon?
Well, there's always going to be public information. My understanding was that they're rowing back on this particular one, from what I've seen today, and not actually going forward with it. But I think the messages need to be out there, and it doesn't always necessarily come from those sorts of organisations, because a lot of this is actually going to be driven by the mainstream media in that respect, and certainly. I would look at it and say that anything that can be done to actually promote it would be a good move. But it depends whether you end up teaching people to suck eggs, in all honesty. Some of the messages can be a little bit perhaps condescending if we're not careful, to a lot of people. I mean, I'm taking my own initiatives with a lot of the things I do around my home, just to make sure. I've not even put my home heating on yet. I don't see any necessity for it. I'm sitting there wearing a hoodie as much as anything else. And I think it's about getting the messages out, but making sure that the messages are the right messages that actually chime and make people think. But certainly it is a government responsibility. I mean, I'm not quite going back to all the public information films of the 70s, shall we say. I remember an awful lot of those, but I think we should be around promoting it and making people stop and think as much as anything else.
Okay, Ian, something the government should be involved in?
No. At the end of the day, I really struggle with some of this. At the end of the day, we're all grown-ups, and if we've come so far as a society where the government has to tell you to put a jumper on if you're cold to save you money, I do worry. And I think this is where we've, in terms of the role of government, and is there how much is the government's responsibility and how much is personal responsibility? I think we have that pendulum has swung too far. I heard it during lockdown. well, you know, if the government, if the ministers can't respect lockdown, then you know, why should we? Well, because you don't want to catch COVID and die. That's why you should do it, not because the government has told you, but because you want to take personal responsibility either for yourself or for the people that you're close to. And I think that, you know, when we look at this, you know, the energy crisis, the hints and tips, you know, if the government sends you a leaflet, are you going to read it? No. You know, I know there are certain factions that love a leaflet. I'm looking your way, Mr. Sainsbury. But how many get read and how many get put in the bin? So yeah, the media has a part to play.
Well, don't
You
get me
know,
started on that.
no, but you know, again, a nice bar graph. See you right. I think there is an.
You beat me to it.
Oh, you see, yes,
Or,
Hang on a
is it
minute.
racing horses is the other one, isn't it? With only so and so can win here.
yeah.
Okay, there's only
But
one
anyway,
horse.
we'll step back from tag teaming the
Yeah.
host. So yeah, no, for me, Simon, it's very clear. At the end of the day, these things are not difficult, and I think the media can play a part by rather than going, "We'll all be dead by Christmas." You know, I think there is very much a, you know, ultimately what you can do. You know, you don't have to. A very quick Google search will give you lots and lots of ideas as to how you can reduce your energy consumption. And it's not just about cost. Yeah, at the end of the day, we have been talking for a long time about our energy consumption and being greener. And if perhaps, you know, people take a bit more personal responsibility and use less, that doesn't seem to me to be a bad thing. But I'm not sure the government telling you is going to make that much of a difference.
You are right to a certain degree. I'm sure that they pulled it, didn't Nadine Zahawi on Laura Kuenssberg this morning, saying that they were not going to go forward with this £15 million scheme this morning, I think.
Yeah. What? So. How this came to light was it was a scheme that Jacob Rees-Mogg, that well-known campaigner for environmental causes, had basically signed off, but that the PM basically nixed it and said, "No, we're not doing that." And I must admit, so for me, the interesting angle was that on one hand, it's well, hang on a minute, you can't pretend that there isn't an issue, but on the other hand, are the people that need to hear this message going to listen to it coming from the government? And is there already are there other avenues by which this sort of information already goes out? And it does. By Ofgem and energy suppliers are obligated to keep telling you ways to basically use less of their product, which is quite interesting. So in that respect, and also all of the news about energy prices is if that doesn't motivate people to find ways to use less of it, I don't know whether a leaflet from His Majesty's government is going to convince people to turn off the lights as they leave the room. So I must admit, I thought it was an easy media war in the sense of it was a kind of like a convicted outrage. But in the other sense, actually, when you look at it, is that really something the government should be into? But I thought it was a very small but interesting example of, is this a demonstration of the sort of small government that Liz Truss favours? In the sense of, that's something the government needs to be involved with, so we won't do it.
No, I think it is exactly that, Simon. I think there is an element of, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the if you look at the fiscal, you know, leaving aside the top rate of tax, the whole Conservative mantra is about, you know, people working hard, earning their money, keeping more of their money that they earn, and spending it to stimulate the economy. And you know, at the end of the day, it is an element of it's about trusting people to be grown-ups with that. And I think that for me, if that is the way we continue to go as a government, I will be very happy in terms of that lighter touch rather than trying to smother people.
Well, if there's less competition for leaflet printing, it'll be cheaper for Lib Dems to print more leaflets, I guess.
Absolutely.
So our last question then.
Please not.
So Penny was a favourite among members to lead, but unfortunately, however you might interpret the the arranging of events by the parliamentary party. She just outside of making it to the final two this time. Would it be, like you said, a sliding doors moment if she'd have been in the final two? Do you think it's a good or a bad thing that for Portsmouth that she didn't win this time? And I say this time because I'm sure we'll see more from Penny.
I think the short answer to that is it's a little bit of both. In all honesty, it's certainly on the one hand, it's a good thing for Portsmouth. It's because she is clearly very much a constituency MP. I mean, she was at the party conference last week, but come Thursday, I was at a meeting with her in Cossam with Southern Water, and a public meeting with an awful lot of residents, and she was back there. She's been out and about at the Mountbatten Centre and Hillsey over the weekend. So she is very much a constituency MP. So on the one thing, it's perhaps a good thing that she didn't get there, because Portsmouth benefits from being a constituency MP. But on the other hand, it's probably a bad thing, because had she become the Prime Minister, because I think I've got no doubt she'd been in the final two, she probably would have won, then it would have put Portsmouth on the map. And I think there would have been some wholesale investment in there coming into Portsmouth, which no doubt Stephen Morgan would have tried to have claimed as his own.
How outrageous!
Everybody loves a selfie, eh, Steve? But certainly, so I think it's mixed blessings, because you can see the pros and cons for it from both sides. But Penny's been out all over the constituency over the last week after the party conference. And that's what people like to see with a constituency MP. And obviously, if you become the Prime Minister, that time is somewhat limited. So the benefits perhaps come in other directions. So I'm going to park my backside firmly on the fence on that one. But I'm sure she will come again. I don't doubt that for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ian, Portsmouth
I'm
game is lost.
I'm hoping it's a sturdy fence, because I'm going to join Simon on it. Slightly different reasons. I think there is an element of Penny works very hard. I've worked with her on a couple of things, found her very engaging and very genuine, and so I think there would be an element of the ability simply to do that work locally would be compromised. I actually think that now is a really, really tough gig. There is a mood, possibly post-pandemic, and then with the Ukrainian effect as well, that people are very unhappy and are very angry. And I think it's a really tough time to pull everything together. And I think Penny would have done a fine job in doing that. But I think it is a really tough ask at the moment. So I think she will be back. I would expect her to become at some point leader of the party and Prime Minister, but maybe now isn't the best time to be stood right at the front. So I think on balance, I'm kind of okay that she didn't win this time, even though I would have preferred her to the other candidates.
Okay. Well, thank you both for that. Thank you very much to all of our viewers who joined in with their comments. Thank you to Owen and Phil. Some great contributions there. Really enjoyed that. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Simon Sainsbury, and our guest has been
Simon Bosher.
And we hoodwinked into Annie Morris.
To be a guest rather than a presenter. I thought the presenter was very good this week. Very good.
Well, thank you very much. That's good. I shall deserve a pay rise. Any percentage pay rise of 0 is still 0, right?
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to turn it around, guys, and get Simon to defend the Lib Dem administration next time round. Okay.
Well, we'll see. I'll bring my best bar chart and we'll see how it goes. So we'll have at it. So do join us next week, 6:27 p.m. when we'll be talking about the full council. So an interesting full council coming up on Tuesday, which will there's several subjects. Is one of them. which Simon had mentioned. So that's in there, as well as a report regarding the options to the continuing use of the civic offices for the council, and the Milton neighbourhood report, as well as we like to talk about things local. We quite rightly get held to account sometimes for not talking about enough local things. And one of the other items on the agenda is you don't get more local than deciding where polling stations are in polling districts across the city. So that's one of the interesting things there. So thank you very much to our guest, Simon Bosher. You've been watching the Pompey Politics podcast.